Welcome to Queer News Tonight, the world's first and only LGBTQ plus daily evening news. It's time to queer up the news. It's 8 p.m. Tuesday, March 1st, 2022, and we are literally out of the closet and into the headlines. So many of your important stories we're going to tell this evening on Queer News Tonight.
This is the world's first live daily LGBTQ evening news show, literally out of the closet and into the headlines on Queer News Tonight with Al Ferguson.
Thank you for joining Queer News Tonight. This is the world's first and only unedited live LGBTQ plus evening news show. Whatever happens, you will see it. Queer News Tonight is supported by viewers like you. We're part of the partnership between Happening Out Television Network and Hotspots Magazine. Hotspots is celebrating 36 years of the LGBTQ plus experience. We bring you the best of LGBTQ plus news, entertainment, and support of our community.
I'm your anchor at Queer News Tonight, Al Ferguson. Let's begin by welcoming anchor Sobourney Barnes, a true Southern Florida native. That's pretty shocking, ain't it? Born and raised in Broward County to parents who found joy in public service. So therefore, is it any surprise she began working at SunServe, a local nonprofit agency that serves the LGBTQIA+ community. A graduate at Florida Atlantic University and Florida International University. And she has been an advocate for LGBTQ+IA youth for almost a decade through her work at SunServe. Welcome, Sobourney.
Thank you, Al. It's nice to be here. Let's welcome anchor John Hayden. John's been a journalist for 27 years and now works for several South Florida outlets, including SFGN, covering politics, arts, and the bar scene, mostly for the latest on Happy Hour, which I love. He spent much of his career covering the stupidity and scandals of Hollywood and interviewed nearly every big name in TV, movies, and music. John considers the time he had to sit and interview Shirley MacLaine after she yelled at him as the scariest 4 minutes of his life. Good evening, John.
Good evening, Sobourney, and you look wonderful. You're wearing purple today. I am wearing purple, though hasn't come through on camera as I'd hoped. It, of course, is the color that we're wearing today to protest the Don't Say Gay bill up in Tallahassee that's currently moving through the Senate. Obviously, we'll talk about that later. There was a great protest this evening down on Miami Beach, and I'm looking forward to hearing how that turned out as well. But for now, let's welcome anchor Dr. Tai Houser. He is an associate professor of English and Humanities at Broward College. He additionally teaches extended periods of time at international colleges in China, India, Spain, and Bolivia, and he's not the kind of doctor that can give you a prescription if you've got a trickle from your drickle.
That's true, but I'll definitely take a look. Let's welcome anchor Glen Weinzimer. A wannabe founder of the Blue Man Group, he actually founded Smart Ride, the second largest AIDS bicycle ride in the country, and the only one of its size to donate 100% of the funds raised to AIDS service organizations. He also owns Bona Italian Restaurant, where they celebrate Give Back Mondays, offering a portion of all sales to a different charity each week. Good evening, Glenn.
Thank you so much as a fashion fashionista, or whatever that word is yourself. Thank you for noticing my blue jacket.
Fashionista.
Fashionista.
Yeah.
Fashionista.
Sobourney, this is going to be a really shady show.
I already can tell.
Just so you know, you just completely took yourself out of the shot. Yeah. So we are going to talk more about the Don't Say Gay bill, but yesterday at the restaurant is our Give Back Monday, and we did it for Wilton Manors Elementary, and I thought it was super important with this all going through that, you know, our community learns more about what's happening and that we support the local school that supports our community. And so it was good to have that connection. It was sort of just by chance because we had booked this months ago, but I was really happy that happened when it did.
Oh, that's great.
So, okay, we are the reporters for Queer News Tonight, and this evening we begin with the queer headlines. The LGBTQ plus community in South Florida and across America is diverse. Our community across the world is vast, and here are the bullet points of the Queer News for today, Tuesday, March 1st. It's time to celebrate Mardi Gras because today is Fat Tuesday. What I didn't know was that Mardi Gras had to have been developed by gay people, because I did not know that it's just before Lent where we all give up the fun.
Yeah.
Well, not we, I mean you.
Yeah. Yeah, not me either. I miss being in New Orleans for Mardi Gras, for sure. Well, let's begin tonight's news by queering up the world. Ukrainian LGBTQ community is fighting back as activists have captured a group of Russian soldiers. As the invasion of Ukraine by Russia continues, members of the LGBTQ plus community are literally fighting for their lives. There are many stories about what's happening for LGBT in Ukraine, and they are showing that it's a fight they're not afraid of. A group of Russian soldiers were found sheltering in the basement of a building in Kharkov, the second largest city in Ukraine. Little did they know that the building was home to an LGBTQ plus rights group. Gay veteran Viktor Polimpenko, who broke the story, said that when the activists found the soldiers, they beat them and took them captive. He told the Israeli Hoyom newspaper, quote, "This is our war, the Ukrainians, but we have also been fighting for LGBT people, and I'm sure that the comrades in Kharkov understood that. We are confronting a tyrannical, homophobic enemy," end quote.
You go, girl.
Yeah.
They got into the gay leather world. Yeah. Is what they got into. I did not know that.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to.
So does Putin. He gets into it too. What do y'all think about what we're watching in Ukraine? Is it?
It's tragic. It's an international tragedy. I've been getting messages from friends around the world saying, you know, this is a crazy time. Just be safe wherever you are, whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
And I mentioned to you, Al, earlier, a friend of mine, I thought he was Russian born, but he was actually born in Ukraine. And 2 days ago, he got his Ukrainian passport updated, and he leaves on Friday to go help fight. He's got to fly through Poland to get there. But he wants to, if he says if his life ends, he'd rather it end there fighting for what's right.
We're going to keep everyone up to date on this because Glen's going to help us make that connection, because we definitely would like to talk to him before he flies to Ukraine. And John and several people have made the point that we want to talk to him once he's in Ukraine also. I watched this morning about 6:45 a.m. The president of Ukraine, when he was doing the live at the European Parliament, in front of Parliament, and I thought it was an incredible moment. If you want to understand what's going on in Ukraine, you should watch that speech that the president of Ukraine did in front of the European Parliament this morning. He was speaking in Ukrainian, and was being translated to the European Parliament. And the translator at the Parliament that was translating for him, the president of Ukraine talked about yesterday at Freedom Square in Kharkov, that 2 cruise missiles hit Freedom Square in Kharkov and killed 12 students yesterday during the attack in Kharkov. And that story was being told by the president and the translator talking about it. And as the president talked about freedom and why Europe and the rest of the world needed to stand up for Ukraine, and the desperate conversation of the human rights abuses that we were watching, I was so moved because the translator got emotional and broke up translating for the president of Ukraine. And I realized that was something I have never seen before. And I realized, wow, this is really an incredible moment in our history of humanity and the world, that even the translator thinks this is a big deal going on.
This man is an inspiration as a leader, because any other leaders that we've seen in recent history in the last couple of decades usually flee the country and try to run from elsewhere. And the fact that he's out there with, you know, AK-47 and missile launcher on his shoulder saying, I'm here in the fight. I mean, he's regardless what happens, he should be Man of the Year just for taking that lead. And I really do think that a lot of NATO and stuff has come together the way they have, in part because of who he is.
Yeah. And you know, one final thought to your observation, I think you just hit a bullseye, Glen. One other final thought of the contrast of what he has been doing and how inspirational he has been for Ukrainians. I mean, literally, mothers and wives are standing in front of tanks and saying, you must stop. And it's being led by the president of Ukraine. And you compare and contrast that to the authoritarian dictator president in Russia, who To show his toxic masculinity, must take off his shirt and ride horses bareback.
That was sexy, though.
Yeah.
Or
I'll never give it.
Trump going across during Black Lives Matter, and clearing the church in front of that church by putting out gas and stuff to clear the crowds because he was so butch that he could get across the street with his Secret Service.
Yeah, exactly. Wow, it's a little it's unsettling to use butch and Trump and Putin almost in the same sentence. Go ahead.
But somehow bareback fit.
I mean, it did, though.
Got my ears up again.
Just before we get off the topic really quickly, I want to just bring up something. For the past couple weeks, you've been discussing how things are happening right here in America are very reminiscent of what happened in Germany in the Nazi Party. And this scares me even more than what's happening here, because to me, I'm like, this is literally it. Like, this was the start of World War II. It's like, is this now World War III that we're looking at? And the fact that the Ukrainian president has not just been demanding the aid that he rightfully needs for his country, but that he's, like you said earlier, he's there on the front lines. Like, I'm not going to move. Like, that is so inspiring. And I think it would be very disappointing if the aid that they need is not actually given, that they are not fully supported just because they're not a part of NATO.
Yeah.
Well, look what Germany did, with suddenly going from, I'm going to send you 5,000 helmets, or whatever that number was, to now sending some of the most best technology there is into Ukraine to help them. Yeah. So, although NATO's not giving the green light.
It's interesting. We're spending a bit more moments on this story, but your observations
still won't be as long as her next story.
It gives me a pit in my stomach, because when you use the word World War II and then use the phrase World War III, there are a lot of very smart people that are talking about your exact point. I've watched a number of them. And the point that they're making is that we're watching an economy that literally crumbled in days. The entire Russian economy has collapsed. They've closed the stock market. The currency, the ruble, there's no value in their money. When Switzerland took their action, the SWIFT fund of blocking their currency around the world, Russia's economy has collapsed. Now, maybe that doesn't have dramatic effect on them today, on Tuesday, but it is going to have dramatic effect. The economy of what we think is a superpower has collapsed literally overnight. The other thing that we're watching, and very smart people are saying, is we're watching an overwhelming and massive invasion. 40-mile-long convoys that are running out of gas. Their technical capability as this massive army is beginning to expose how poorly organized they really are. They're not NATO. They're not NATO defense. They're for sure not the American U.S. military. And we're watching even their military in overwhelming superiority compared to the Ukrainians, and still they're having difficulty. The pit of both of those is that many people are suggesting why Putin is talking about nuclear weapons. There's no question they have that capability.
He's desperate.
He's desperate. And Hillary Clinton came on this morning on MSNBC talking about when Hillary Clinton and Marco Rubio agree, we've got a big problem. And both of them said, he's losing it. And your observation gives me a pit in my stomach of going, we've watched economic collapsing. We're watching military. They're not going to collapse because they are so overwhelming compared to Ukraine. But we're watching, if they were doing this in Poland, it would be a completely different situation. That 40 miles that we keep hearing about outside of Kiev would be wiped out in minutes in Poland. That 40 miles sitting there in Poland. So we may be watching really devastating news that are going to come in the days and weeks ahead. Yeah. That gives a pit in my stomach, to be honest with you.
Me as well. And we move on by queering up the world. A Chechen leader who masterminded gay torture and execution policy is killed in Ukraine. The Russian Republic of Chechnya has made news in recent years for the torture and execution of LGBTQ+ individuals by the government. Chechen authorities subscribe to the Stalinist idea of, quote, shared responsibility, blaming families for raising, quote, public enemies and punishing them if they don't help persecute and murder relatives in their so-called honor killing system. One of the Chechen leaders responsible for many such atrocities is Mahmoud Tashayev. Tashayev was head of the 141st Motorized Regiment of the Chechnya National Guard when he was killed during a battle to take over an international cargo airport near the capital of Ukraine, Kiev. And this has been going on in Chechnya for a long time. They're predominantly Muslim state area, and so honor killings are already a big part of that culture, and it has been egged on and encouraged by the government.
I never like to hear the news of someone dying, but I mean, it does send a message.
Yeah, yeah. You know, one thing that I think of, just, you know, I won't say that I'm celebrating his death, but one of the things that I think is really important in this moment of Chechnya, of how they've treated LGBT, it is not very far removed of how they've handled LGBT in Russia. For all intents and purposes, we talk about the bill being an erasure of LGBT in Florida, of Don't Say Gay, not because it's going to affect kindergarten to third grade, but because it'll be used as the beachhead to justify what's next, and what's next, and what's next. Putin's Russia and what he has done to LGBT has been exported to Belarus and has been exported to Chechnya, that caused this ultra extreme in Chechnya. And I would just remind everybody, while he has been silent in the last couple of days, proposed strongmen do not really have the same place in the world that they once had. And one of the American strongmen, Donald Trump, just 1 week ago was talking about how brilliant Vladimir Putin was in what he was doing in Ukraine. He's silent today because he knows what's going on in the world. But Russia, Belarus, Chechnya, this story, what's happening in Ukraine, what we watched for the last year in Poland and Hungary, this kind of thinking in the world must be stood up to and faced. And that includes Palm Beach Island, in my opinion.
I feel like we just got to leave it there because you said it so well. So up next, let's queer up the USA. New census on states where LGBTQ Americans live. 4 states top 1 million queer. Glinda the Good Witch in The Wizard of Oz sang, come out wherever you are," to the oppressed class of Oz called the Munchkins. Well, more than 80 years later, UCLA School of Law Williams Institute replaces Glinda and says the same thing about where queer people live in America: live, are coupled, have children, their health, their employment, and so much more. And the results of the Williams Institute survey may surprise you. The biggest news is over where we live. Based on the 2022 census estimates, 4 states have crossed more than 1 million LGBT people for the first time in history. What may also be a surprise is that the birthplace of queer culture in the Stonewall riots of 1969 is not number one. 1969 is not number one. In fact, New York is one of the 4 states with more than 1 million queer people. But start spreading the news, New York is actually number 4. The news about where we live is also like the trend of the last 50 years in America. We are moving. Like the iconic singing group, the Village People told us, go west. And we did. We didn't stay in a New York state of mind as we followed other Sunbelt southern states, as we apparently prefer the song Deep in the Heart of Texas and dance along with Will Smith's song Welcome to Miami. The top 5 states where queer Americans live is number 5, Pennsylvania, with an estimated 524,964 LGBTQ. Illinois was extremely close to number 5, but a higher percentage of LGBTQ live in Pennsylvania. Number 4 is New York with 1 million LGBTQ. This is the largest number in 2022 in history, but was outpaced by the big 3. Number 3 is Florida with 1,009,424 living in the Sunshine State, with 3 major gay metroplexes of Tampa Bay, Orlando, and of course, South Florida. Estimates show more than 40% of all LGBTQ in Florida live in Broward, Miami-Dade, and Palm Beach County. This makes South Florida one of the largest and highest density gay communities in the world. Gonna be honest, little surprised since we are a huge red state that we have so many gay people here, but I digress. Number 2 is Texas with 1,189,200 queer people. Of the top 5 states, however, Texas represents how difficult it could be for LGBTQ to live in Texas, as the state's 2022 general population is nearly 8 million more people than Florida, but has only 180,000 more LGBTQ. And of course, the Golden State appears to be golden for LGBTQ, as number 1 is California.
I was going to say Montana.
I was going to honestly say New Hampshire. I'd guess that before anything else. Kidding. With 2,999,489 queer people living there. Dang, California, go you. California has nearly as many LGBTQ as Texas and Florida combined, and it's the first time more than 2 million gay people are living in any American state. This makes California one of the highest density queer places on earth. Want to see where your state ranks? Check out the Williams Institute website for lots of valuable details.
I'm waiting for it to come out on books on tape myself.
That would make it a lot easier, because that was a lot to come out on. Like,
I just got to say, come on, Pennsylvania. I'm a Pennsylvania boy. I was surprised to see us on there.
Were you really?
Yeah.
That many LGBT live in Pennsylvania?
That we got.
You know what's interesting to me about Pennsylvania is Illinois is actually, I believe, slightly larger than Pennsylvania, but Pennsylvania is on the list because more percentage of people are LGBT in Pennsylvania than they are in Illinois. And a lot of that is, after you get outside of Chicago, the numbers drop dramatically. Whereas Pennsylvania has many, like Florida, has many metroplexes of large populations. Of
Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, of course. But then Penn State University, as is University Town when the students are in session, is, I think, the second largest city in Pennsylvania. So I'm sure those numbers help too.
Yeah,
definitely.
What's interesting is that number 2 and number 3 are both red states that are doing everything they can right now in their legislative to suppress the LGBTQ community and the trans community. And yet we have such a large population nationwide. I also find it interesting is that other states that are not even ranking, is it really because there's so fewer LGBT, or they're just not comfortable identifying or coming out because of where they live, and going back to the whole fear thing? So,
you know, that's really a terrific observation, Glenn, because Williams Institute, right, your modesty. The Williams Institute draws attention that they draw this statistical base, and they're reporting from many different sources. And the Gallup poll has turned everybody on their ear, because the relatively new Gallup poll says once upon a time it was like 3.5% identification, then it moved to 5%, then it moved to 7%. The new Gallup poll suggests that it's 10% identifying as LGBTQ or LGBTQ. And if you're Gen Z and you're young, it's as high as 20%. And that's exactly to your point. Depending on the statistics, the numbers may be far greater than we know, because so many people have refused to identify as LGBT because they don't want to face Tallahassee and don't say gay kinds of measures, or what goes on in Texas about the trans discrimination issue. So I think that that's a real good point. One other thing that I think is super interesting is in the story, the draw comparison between Texas and Florida. Texas is much, much larger. Texas is larger than Florida than Pennsylvania's whole population adding to Florida. That's how big Texas is. And Texas only generally identifies at about 180,000 more. So as a result, Texas is a much more difficult, your point about Florida being a red state. Well, Florida's a red state, and then Texas is a whole different animal.
Like, one's kind of dark red, the other is blood red.
Yeah, blood red. Yes, I'll never forget that. Blood red Texas.
On steroids.
Okay, well, next, I'm going to queer up education. Don't Say Gay Senate Committee rejects Republicans' attempt to tone down bill. Republican Florida Senator Jeff Brandes of St. Petersburg recently suggested an amendment to the controversial Don't Say Gay bill as it moves to the Senate for discussion. Currently, the bill bars teachers from discussing gender identity or sexual orientation in kindergarten through third grade, or in ways that are not, quote, developmentally appropriate for other grades. Instead of restricting schools from teaching young kids about sexual orientation and gender identities, Brandes' amendment would have stopped schools from conducting lessons on human sexuality or sexual activity. Brandes said, quote, "If the intent is not to marginalize anyone, let's make sure we aren't. Let's be clear and clearly define and say that conversations about human sexuality or sexual activity that fall outside of state guidelines should not occur. We can do this," end quote. Proving that the bill is entirely about being anti-LGBTQ and not about protecting children from conversations about sex, the bill's sponsor, Senator Dennis Baxley, said that the amendment would, quote, gut the bill, and it was voted down by the Republicans in the state Senate.
There it is.
They're going all in on hate.
Yep.
Basically.
That's what it is. They're going all in on hate.
Yeah.
All the chips to the center of the table.
And masking it.
Yeah. You know, it just wrapped up a few minutes ago at 6 o'clock tonight down in Miami Beach. As I mentioned at the top of the show, there was the rally, and yesterday we talked about the banner planes that they tried to hire, and then a company refused to fly Don't Say Gay behind them. I can tell you that I talked with Scott this afternoon. They were able to find another contractor, and the banner planes did fly over several South Florida high schools this afternoon, over Wilton Manors, and presumably down at 6 o'clock down on the Miami Beach Pride. I'm going to talk to him later and do a whole wrap-up on this controversy and the latest movements in Tallahassee that'll be in South Florida Gay News on Thursday.
Does the conclusion of what happened yesterday, does it surprise any of you in terms of Senator Brandes trying to move it to, you can't talk about sex in school in this age group, preschool to third grade, which seems pretty obvious anyway, but you can't talk about sex in any way, and then that takes the entire issue away, and the rejection. Does it surprise you what happened?
What surprised me that he was a Republican that proposed it, but it doesn't surprise me that they rejected it because it's very
congratulations
clearly
to
been.
Brandes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not like all Republicans are bad. Like, we don't want to put just because of someone's political affiliation doesn't always mean they're a bad person or that they
Al's
have
a Republican.
bad intent. See? I'm kidding. I don't know, and I'm not gonna sign off on that.
Point
But-
made.
But yes, it's something. To me, he was trying to make a point. He was trying to make the point that this bill has nothing to do with actually keeping kids safe, but furthering the agenda of LGBTQ hate and harming people, starting with our kids.
You know, you work with LGBTQ youth at Census, in how this is digested for you and your position in dealing with young people in schools. What do you think is behind this? I mean, your gut reaction of what is it they want from these actions?
My gut reaction, and this will sound so horrible, I'm still gonna say it, they want to stop making more queer kids. Long story short, because that's all that it's aiming to do, is to force kids who are literally, how many hours do they spend in school? The same amount of time that we spend at work, supposedly 8 hours, correct? Or am I wrong?
Yeah, 6 to 8
Yeah,
hours.
so 6 to 8 hours of their day, of 24 hours that they're not fully awake. A good portion of that is them being asleep for 24 hours of a day. 6 to 8 hours are at school, the rest of that time they're at home. Those are their two main hubs. If they don't have a safe place to go where they can have the conversations, where they can see different ways of life, hear different opinions, they're not going to feel safe. They're not going to feel heard. They're not going to feel like they're able to grow. So at the end of the day, what it seems to me is that they're just trying to make it so that, okay, we don't have any more queer kids, get rid of that issue altogether by making it that, okay, we can't have these discussions at all, and just saying, all right, so from a certain grade point to a certain grade point. Kids have questions at all points. My niece is 2, and she asked me the weirdest little things, like, what's that? And she's pointing at like sanitary napkins, and I'm like, I'm not gonna have this conversation with a 2-year-old other than this is Annie's, okay, thank you, and walking away.
You know, it's interesting to me, if your assessment is accurate, then we come right back to Glen's point of view and our conversation point of view about Gallup poll and the Williams Institute. The number is likely much, much higher. But unless you have comfort, you're not going to express it. And that's what you just told us. The goal and the desire is to repress your comfort level of being able to express who you are. And as a result, there's less of you.
Yes.
That's terrible.
And based on if this was to pass, our numbers in the Gallup poll next time will show that there are less LGBT people in our community.
Yeah, terrible.
But anyway, let's move on. We're going to queer up politics. Record number of LGBTQ plus candidates running in Texas primary. Today marks the official start of the 2022 election as Texas holds their primaries for the midterm election. Texas lost several blue districts to the GOP in the 2020 election, and so these primaries will be closely watched. Joining the fray are 54 openly LGBTQ plus candidates, which is pretty amazing, nearly double the 28 who ran in 2020. With Governor Abbott recently requiring the Department of Families and Protective Services to investigate cases of trans teenagers seeking treatment as child abuse. LGBTQ plus issues may be the topic that win or lose Texas. This goes back to everything we've been talking about. You know, someone else take it, but yes, it's just frustrating.
Well, it's just surprising that Texas has come up with that many folks to run that identify as LGBTQ. And the fact that they are running, I think, means that they at least feel like they have a chance to make some kind of wave. Whether or not they believe they can win, they have a chance to add to the conversation.
And it goes back to the Gallup poll.
And I look at that exact same point and see a negative. 54 people out of across the entire second most populous state in the country, and only 54 people are running. I think that says more to Texas's oppressive nature than the fact that they've almost doubled in a couple of years.
Still progressive, still heading in the right direction.
We can hold those bifurcated views.
Yeah, and, that's funny. You know, it's interesting to me, first, the contrast of moving from 28 and 20 to 54 today in Texas. It reminds me, in a much smaller example, that Texas is one of the states that has a pickup from the census. The new census, there's going to be more seats in Congress for Texas because of population. But the population increase is a reality, just like LGBT is a reality. There are more women, there's more LGBT representation, and especially in Texas, there's more Latino.
I said more diversity.
And diversity is coming. So, old white boy, you can't hold your finger in the dike forever. So even if you accomplish it one more time this year, there's a time on the horizon that is coming that you're not going to be able to do it. And in terms of outright fraud or stealing an election, like you tried to do on January 6th, those are going to be your only options. Time is ticking for you. And which side of history are you going to be on?
Why did you put a finger in the dike?
Exactly.
See, that's the part that got me.
Okay, those are our queer news headlines for today.
Thanks,
so
Tai.
let's catch up on the LGBTQ plus news surrounding COVID-19 with our special segment called Quarantine Quickies.
Queer News Tonight has reported on coronavirus every week since January 6, 2020. Tonight, we report that there are more than 5,645,000 LGBTQ plus Americans who have contracted COVID-19.
Queer News Tonight remembers the more than 68,000 LGBTQ plus Americans that have died from coronavirus.
But the news is improving because as of today, more than 553 million vaccination doses have been administered in the U.S.
That's our pandemic news for tonight. Next, we report on our partnership with Sunshine Cathedral, the world's largest queer church here in Fort Lauderdale. We are broadcasting from our permanent set here at Sunshine in supporting that partnership. Happening Out Television Network broadcasts the largest LGBTQ plus religious live broadcasts in the world, as more than 30,000 watch every Sunday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern. Watch this.
I'm Dean Trantalis, the mayor of the city of Fort Lauderdale. They say the gayest place on planet Earth, and Sunshine Cathedral is my queer church.
Well, now we finish tonight's queer news headlines with a segment we call LGBTQ plus flash news. In LGBTQ plus flash news, the LGBTQ community waves a 700-foot pride flag across Sarasota Bay in protest to Don't Say Gay. Project Pride SRQ over the weekend organized a march across the Ringling Bridge in Sarasota to protest the Don't Say Gay bill. Protesters carried signs as well as a 700-foot rainbow flag to draw attention to the community most at risk because of the bill. Arthur Boyce, Vice President of Project Pride SRQ, said, quote, "We are very concerned about the fact that there is legislation going through that will target LGBTQ children. Children have no ability to fight for themselves. They don't have a voice. They don't have a vote. And we feel it's necessary for someone to stand up and say, you can't target kids like that. It's just not right," end quote. Very proud of Sarasota and the Project SRQ Pride organization. Sarasota is my home. That's where my house is. My house can see this bridge. And I remind everybody, Sarasota is a deeply, deeply red county. So to have this demonstration across the Ringling Causeway Bridge is really quite motivational for this Sarasotan sitting in Wilton Manors, Fort Lauderdale.
What I love most is the fact that just from the pictures alone, I saw youth there fighting for their rights. And I've said it before that sadly, at least from what I've noticed down here, it seems like youth don't know what's going on, but they do. So this just proves me wrong. Like, there are young people who know what's going on. They are standing up, they are fighting, they are doing something, they are not staying silent. So watch out, DeSantis.
I love them. And you think a block is 500 feet long. So this was well over a block long. It's incredibly wide. Just to see it in person, I wasn't at this thing, but I've seen the flag before. And it takes your breath away. And the statement of just its existence and unfurling is powerful.
So in one sentence, I want to know how they got that whole flag into the glove box.
It was on somebody's pickup.
They drove it across the bridge. That's a funny joke.
That is funny. I want to go to the quote where he said that children don't have a voice, they don't have a vote. That is exactly what Tallahassee is trying to do to most of our state.
Yeah, boy,
is
that's
to silence
powerful.
that vote and
It was
silence
a
that
very
voice.
powerful line.
Yeah, very powerful.
So that is today's news for the LGBTQ plus community on the world's first and only daily LGBTQ plus evening news show. Is our community important to you?
Then help us by liking and subscribing. Ring the bell for updates. Share the news with your family and friends. And get Roku.
Post this broadcast to the many groups of which you are a member. Tonight's stories about our community deserve the attention of your family and friends.
Queer News Tonight is the only live LGBTQ plus digital television show in the world that is out of the closet and into the headlines. We need your support. And subscribe also to Apple.
Yeah, exactly. If our community is to grow, we must tell our stories and bring them to the attention of the broader world. This is the only place in the world that tells these type of LGBTQ plus stories in motion and sound. And that is the passion of the Happening Out Television Network and Queer News Tonight. I'm your anchor, Al Ferguson, and on behalf of these LGBTQ plus reporters, the anchors of Queer News Tonight, including Sobourney Barnes, John Hayden, Dr. Tai Houser, and Glen Weinzimer, we will see you daily at 8 p.m. But before we end our show, we have one final story.
Yeah, we're not going to let you guys get away that quickly. So let's queer up gay culture. With LGBTQ plus under attack, Equality Florida's Nadine Smith emotional, the state of the state. Queer News Tonight was proud to participate in the LGBTQ Democratic Caucus Turn It Up, Turn It Out conference in St. Petersburg recently. During the event, Equality Florida's Executive Director, Nadine Smith, presented an emotional speech about the state of the state. Watch this.
Well, good evening, everyone. Yes. I feel so charged up to be here, and I saw my next senator and sorority sister Valdemis come in, and I got happy in my soul. I got happy in my soul. Well, for those who do not know me, I am Michelle Rayner. I'm a state representative for House District 70. Also, I'm just running for a little thing called Congress as well. And so I am proud to be here. But the reason that I am standing before you, I'm even more prouder. In my community, Black folks say you give someone their flowers while they are living so they can smell them. And it is for that reason I am profoundly honored to introduce and present Nadine Smith her Lifetime Achievement Award. To many of us in this room, Nadine is not a stranger. Her resume and accomplishments are long. She's the executive director for Equality Florida, the state's largest LGBTQ civil rights organization. In 1993, Nadine was one of the 4 national co-chairs for the March on Washington. She's a Florida Chamber Foundation trustee. Nadine has been named one of the state's most powerful and influential women and one of the 100 most influential Floridians by Influence magazine. Yeah, y'all can clap, y'all can clap. But here's the thing. While all of this is amazing and all of this is worthy of flowers, and I'm really proud of you, Nadine, that is not the only reason why I believe Nadine deserves her flowers. She deserves them and more because of who she is. Nadine stands at the intersections of being a woman, being Black, and being a lesbian. Navigating those worlds are not easy, and most certainly not easy for when Nadine came out. Standing at the intersections of her identity are not easy when you are faced with rejection, discrimination, violence, and hate. It is not easy to continuously show up unapologetically and advocate when there are folks who are committed to misunderstanding you and hating you just because of who you are. It is not easy to be the first and then to continue joy and to choose love. But Nadine did that. I think about my 11-year-old self who had no idea that a Nadine Smith existed. I was in my room, realized I was queer, and yet her existence, her life made it, and her advocacy made it possible for me to be standing in front of you this evening. But it's not just me. Nadine did all of that for all of us in this room. Her choice to live out loud and pair that with her fierce advocacy is why all of us are here tonight. She was our advocate when we didn't even know we had an advocate. So her accomplishments are far beyond policy, winning elections, and the like. Her deepest and truest accomplishment is that by showing up authentically and unafraid, she has enabled all of us to do the same. I also want to thank her wife, Andrea. I know she's not here, and her son, Logan. We are grateful that you love Nadine enough to loan her to us and allow her to sacrifice her time for the work that she does. So in closing, Nadine, I will tell you this from the bottom of my heart, and I've said it to you over and over again. We owe you a debt of gratitude that can never be repaid. Thank you.
Look at that. Thank you so much. All right. Thank you for the flowers. I'm gonna go ahead and put that right there. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it. All right. Thank you all. Thank you. I appreciate it. I really do. You know, you hear you're getting a Lifetime Achievement Award, and my first thought was, what do you know? What have you heard? I feel pretty good. Well, first of all, thank you. And I thank you on my behalf, but also because I think what this symbolizes is that we all recognize the time that we are in, and we all recognize that all hands must be on deck at this moment. And this symbolizes the synergy and the work that all of our organizations are engaged in together at the local level, at the state level, and at the national level. And if you look around the room, you see that. You see that represented here. And we have to be. The fights that we are fighting now, for those of us with gray in our hair, should seem very familiar. We know what it's like when they go after our schools and they tell us that they will erase us or harm us if we don't hide. We know what it is like to be targeted for no other reason but for political gain. We've fought these fights before. And they look at our community and they say to themselves, who is the most vulnerable, and that's who we'll go after, which is why they have put a very clear target on the backs of trans youth in our schools. They think that they are powerless. They think they are numerically so small that they can caricature who they are. And it is our job not only not actually to tell the story of trans young people, but to create the platforms where they can tell their own stories and we can amplify their voices. And that is what we are committed to doing in the face of the hatred and the demonization that the far right has made a cornerstone of their election campaign. I want to talk about why we are where we are right now, and there are two very big reasons. The first one is very obvious. There are two Floridians who want to be the next president of the United States. One is the former president of the United States who lives in Mar-a-Lago, and the other is the current governor of Florida. And they've been fighting behind the scenes for quite some time, but it spilled into the public recently where Trump called DeSantis gutless for refusing to make public his vaccination status, and where DeSantis began ratcheting up his criticism of Trump for even his meager response to COVID. And so what we have here is a legislative agenda that has nothing to do with what Floridians actually need, doesn't address a single problem, and in fact invents them, all so he can put on his campaign literature that he is fighting the culture war. So that's part one of why this roster of censorship and surveillance bills that the governor is pushing and Republican leadership is pushing, it's all because right-wing think tanks told them you have to check these boxes if you're going to pull Trump's base out from underneath him. The second thing that we all have to understand is this. I remember the day I realized that Trump was going to become president. It was a year and a month before he announced formally, though everyone knew he was going to throw his hat in the ring. And I was in a ballroom in Miami, Florida with Chev Jones, with Republican Chip LaMarca. I won't stop you. And it was a Leadership Florida event. And it was the final one of the four gatherings, and what I remember vividly was it was a demographer on the agenda. It said demographer Jim Johnson from University of North Carolina is going to speak about disruptive demographics and the impact on consumer markets. And I thought, I'm going to very slyly play Words with Friends in the back because that sounds boring. And so this older black man who had many granddad kind of jokes, lulled us into a sense of warmth and camaraderie. And then he really just dropped the hammer. I remember he said, America is in the midst of a generational convulsion that is going to roil every part of our society, politically, economically, and socially. And he said it's the collision of two demographic realities, the graying of America and the browning of America. And the graying of America was that the older generation, because of healthcare inequities and economic inequities and how that all plays out, that the older generation in America was overwhelmingly white. But that the younger generation, there was no majority. It was a real melting pot racially. And so I have known these stats as a mathematical reality, but hadn't really conjured fully what that meant. And what he said that day is the collision of these generational realities has pricked a kind of existential terror, particularly among older white people who overwhelmingly vote. And so the vision of America that we have been wrestling with is make America great again, take America backwards, put us back in the closet, put black people back in their place, send immigrants back to where they came from. All of those things that had his openly racist neo-Nazi base cheering in the streets, but also struck a chord with people who would never align themselves in any public way with those sentiments, but they had a sense that something was shifting. And in that shift, even if they never recognized privilege, they understood that perhaps on the other side of it, something would be gone. And so we have to understand where we are right now and why these appeals of DeSantis, where he chants free Florida while making us less free, creating more surveillance, more censorship, more book banning, more fear, more policing, how these contradictions exist and why they exist. And we have to understand it because we are up against people who declared war on us years ago. Donald Trump didn't start running in June of 2016. He was running when he was challenging Barack Obama's citizenship. You know, he was running when he was calling for the death penalty for the exonerated Central Park victims of racism, right? So we have to understand what we are up against. And the intersection where I live is a busy one. But here's what I know, and I'll just leave you with this. In addition to my gratitude, I draw hope from this community because we know what it is to fight to exist in our own homes growing up as children. We know what it is to fight to exist when the government turns its back, when an epidemic is decimating us. We know what it is to fight to exist when we didn't have organizations like this one, like Equality Florida. We know what it is to forge family out of something that is tougher than blood. And I know that when the marriage fight came, the far right said, we have the perfect wedge issue. Democrats are a little wobbly on it. Republicans are incensed at the idea. And so they went after us, state after state. 38 times we lost. But in the wake of every one of those defeats, something incredible happened. And that was the polling numbers got better for LGBT issues. It was as though our neighbors who had just voted to deny us what their own families could enjoy, it was as though they woke up and surveyed the damage and thought, what the hell did we just do? And so right now, there are people, some of them in our families, some of them are high school friends, some of them are coworkers, who are in the grip of a fear that they may not be able to articulate, but they are drawn to a message that says, don't worry, I will put things back in place so that you do not have to worry about losing a single thing. And the only antidote to that, just like we discovered with marriage, we couldn't talk about marriage in terms of rights and benefits. We had to talk about it in terms of love. And that's when the dial began to change. And right now, we can be infuriated by that fear that we see playing out in the kinds of legislation that Ron DeSantis is inflicting on our state. We can feel that towards that cousin, that uncle, that friend who is suddenly spouting conspiracy theories. But what we know is that the path forward for our country means that every single person in this room has to have a vision of America that has them in it, that has possibility, that has economic security, that has something for my 10-year-old child and your children and your grandchildren. And we are at the forefront. We are at that intersection because any agenda for the LGBTQ community that does not tackle racism, that does not tackle sexism, leaves us behind. So I am proud to accept this, and I'm grateful for all of you, and we're just getting started. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Nadine Smith. That was wonderful, insightful, and certainly
LGBTQ plus news is vital for our community and for the broader world as a whole. We have enough enemies at Fox News. Tucker, Sean, and Laura are loud. We need passionate allies. Happening Out television network, Queer News Tonight, and It's Happening Out are literally out of the closet and into the headlines. Our community needs your support. Like this broadcast and subscribe now. Who broke the story, said that when the activists found the soldiers, they beat them and took them captive. He told the Israeli Hoyom newspaper, quote, "This is our war, the Ukrainians. But we have also been fighting for LGBT people, and I'm sure that the comrades in Kharkov understood that. We are confronting a tyrannical, homophobic enemy," end quote.
You go, girl.
Yeah.
They got into the gay leather world. Yeah. That's what they got into. I did not know that.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to.
So does Putin. He gets into it too. What do y'all think about what we're watching in Ukraine? Is it?
It's tragic. It's an international tragedy. It's. I've been getting messages from friends around the world saying, you know, this is a crazy time. Just be safe wherever you are, whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
And I mentioned to you, Al, earlier, a friend of mine, I thought he was Russian born, but he was actually born in Ukraine. And 2 days ago, he got his Ukrainian passport updated, and he leaves on Friday to go help fight. He's got to fly through Poland to get there. But he wants to, if he says if his life ends, he'd rather it end there fighting for what's right.
We're going to keep everyone up to date on this because Glen's going to help us make that connection, because we definitely would like to talk to him before he flies to Ukraine. And John and several people have made the point that we want to talk to him once he's in Ukraine also. I watched this morning about 6:45 a.m. The president of Ukraine, when he was doing the live at the European Parliament, in front of Parliament, and I thought it was an incredible moment. If you want to understand what's going on in Ukraine, you should watch that speech that the president of Ukraine did in front of the European Parliament this morning. He was speaking in Ukrainian, and was being translated to the European Parliament. And the translator at the parliament that was translating for him, the president of Ukraine talked about yesterday at Freedom Square in Kharkov, that 2 cruise missiles hit Freedom Square in Kharkov and killed 12 students yesterday during the attack in Kharkov. And that story was being told by the president and the translator talking about it. And as the president talked about freedom and why Europe and the rest of the world needed to stand up for Ukraine, and the desperate conversation of the human rights abuses that we were watching, I was so moved because the translator got emotional and broke up translating for the president of Ukraine. And I realized that was something I have never seen before. And I realized, wow, this is really an incredible moment in our history of humanity and the world, that even the translator thinks this is a big deal going on.
This man is an inspiration as a leader, because any other leaders that we've seen in recent history in the last couple of decades usually flee the country and try to run from elsewhere. And the fact that he's out there with, you know, AK-47 and missile launcher on his shoulder saying, "I'm here in the fight." I mean, regardless what happens, he should be Man of the Year just for taking that lead. And I really do think that a lot of NATO and stuff has come together the way they have, in part because of who he is.
Yeah. And you know, one final thought to your observation, I think you just hit a bullseye, Glen. One other final thought of the contrast of what he has been doing and how inspirational he has been for Ukrainians. I mean, literally, mothers and wives are standing in front of tanks and saying, "You must stop." And it's being led by the president of Ukraine. And you compare and contrast that to the authoritarian dictator president in Russia, who, to show his toxic masculinity, must take off his shirt and ride horses bareback.
That was sexy, though.
Yeah.
Or
Trump
Trump going across during Black Lives Matter, you know, and clearing the church in front of that church by putting out gas and stuff to clear the crowds, because he was so butch that he could get across the street with his Secret Service.
Yeah, exactly. Wow, it's a little it's unsettling to use Butch and Trump and Putin almost in the same sentence, Glenn.
But somehow bareback fit.
I mean, it did, though.
Got my ears up again.
No, just before we get off the topic really quickly, I want to just bring up something. For the past couple weeks, you've been discussing how things are happening right here in America are very reminiscent of what happened in Germany in the Nazi Party. And this scares me even more than what's happening here, because to me, I'm like, this is literally it. Like, this was the start of World War II. It's like, is this now World War III that we're looking at? And the fact that the Ukrainian president has not just been demanding the aid that he rightfully needs for his country, but that he's, like you said earlier, he's there on the front lines. Like, I'm not going to move. Like, that is so inspiring. And I think it would be very disappointing if the aid that they need is not actually given, that they are not fully supported just because they're not a part of NATO.
Yeah.
Well, look what Germany did, you know, with suddenly going from, I'm going to send you 5,000 helmets, or whatever that number was, to now sending some of the most best technology there is into Ukraine to help them. So, you know, although NATO's not giving the green light.
You know, it's interesting. We're spending a bit more moments on this story, but your observations
Still won't be as long as her next story.
It gives me a pit in my stomach, because when you use the word World War II and then use the phrase World War III, there are a lot of very smart people that are talking about your exact point. I've watched a number of them. And the point that they're making is that we're watching an economy that literally crumbled in days. Days. The entire Russian economy has collapsed. They've closed the stock market. The currency, the ruble, there's no value in their money. When Switzerland took their action, the SWIFT fund of blocking their currency around the world, Russia's economy has collapsed. Now, maybe that doesn't have dramatic effect on them today, on Tuesday, but it is going to have dramatic effect. The economy of what we think is a superpower has collapsed literally overnight. The other thing that we're watching, and very smart people are saying, is we're watching an overwhelming and massive invasion. 40-mile-long convoys that are running out of gas. Their technical capability as this massive army is beginning to expose how poorly organized they really are. They're not NATO. They're not NATO defense. They're for sure not the American U.S. military. And we're watching even their military in overwhelming superiority compared to the Ukrainians, and still they're having difficulty. The pit of both of those is that many people are suggesting why Putin is talking about nuclear weapons. There's no question they have that capability.
He's desperate.
He's desperate. And Hillary Clinton came on this morning on MSNBC talking about when Hillary Clinton and Marco Rubio agree, we've got a big problem. And both of them said, he's losing it. And your observation gives me a pit in my stomach of going, we've watched economic collapsing. We're watching military. They're not going to collapse because they are so overwhelming compared to Ukraine. But we're watching, if they were doing this in Poland, it would be a completely different situation. That 40 miles that we keep hearing about outside of Kiev would be wiped out in minutes in Poland. That 40 miles sitting there in Poland. So we may be watching really devastating news that are going to come in the days and weeks ahead. Yeah. That gives a pit in my stomach, to be honest with you. LGBTQ plus news is vital for our community and for the broader world as a whole. We have enough enemies at Fox News. Tucker, Sean, and Laura are loud. We need passionate allies. Happening Out television network, Queer News Tonight, and It's Happening Out are literally out of the closet and into the headlines. Our community needs your support. Like this broadcast and subscribe now to ensure the growth of the entire LGBT